Today, we're going to dive into the very heart of how we actually learn. It's a journey that was kicked off by this pretty wild experiment, one that involves sticking a computer in a slum wall. And believe it or not, it finds some shocking parallels in the world of cutting edge AI.
So let's kick things off with a real zinger from the sci-fi legend Arthur C. Clarke. He actually said this to the researcher we're talking about today, Sugata Mitra. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What is a teacher really for in an age where information is everywhere? And could it be that we've been getting the whole idea of learning wrong all this time?
And that brings us to this big problem, this paradox that researcher Sagata Mitra zeroed in on way back in 1999. It's a really simple idea, but it's one that plagues education systems all over the world.
You see, what he noticed was this really fundamental imbalance. It happens in every single country. The kids who need the most help, the ones in far-flung villages or tough city neighborhoods, they're the ones who are least likely to ever get a great teacher. It's a gap in resources that just turns into this devastating gap in opportunity. So this got Mitra thinking about something pretty radical. He thought, okay, if you can't get a teacher to these places, what if you just provide the tool for learning? A computer, an internet connection, and then you just walk away? This single question was the seed for his now famous hole-in-the-wall experiments.
So yeah, he actually did it. He put his theory to the test. He stuck a computer in a wall in a New Delhi slum. We're talking about a place where the kids had never even seen a computer before, and they didn't speak a word of English. And then he just watched. What happened next wasn't just surprising, it pretty much blew up decades of educational theory.
And you can see the pattern here, right? It was undeniable. I mean, you've got kids teaching each other to use the internet in just a few hours, or figuring out how to record their own music. The one thing that became crystal clear was this: you don't need to teach curiosity, you just need to give people the tools to go explore. Like Arthur C. Clarke said to him later, if children have interest, then education happens. Okay, so let's get into this, because this is where things get really crazy. This is where Mitra decided to push his experiment to the absolute limits, with a challenge that, honestly, on paper, sounds completely impossible. Just think about that for a second. He went to this village in South India, found a group of kids who only spoke Tamil, and gave them a computer. But this computer was loaded with super advanced materials on molecular biology, all written in English. He told them this is really hard stuff, and then he just left. For 2 months. He honestly thought he'd come back and their test score would be a big fat 0. But when he came back, this is what a 12-year-old girl said to him. They basically told him, oh, we didn't understand anything, except for the core concept of how DNA replication causes genetic disease. I mean, come on. Their test scores went from 0 to 30%. That's supposed to be an educational impossibility. They had literally taught themselves. So how? How is that even possible? How can the human brain learn something that complex without a teacher? Well, the answer, weirdly enough, comes from a totally different world: artificial intelligence. It turns out that the way we struggle to teach machines gives us this amazing insight into how our own minds actually work. You see, in the AI world, they have this problem called catastrophic forgetting. It's basically what happens when you cram for an exam. You stuff your brain with all this new information for your history final, and it just pushes out everything you learned for your science test last week. When an AI learns passively, just by absorbing data, kind of like us reading a textbook, the new information can literally just overwrite the old stuff. And this really shows us that there are two totally different ways to learn. There's off-policy learning. That's the passive stuff, like reading a manual or watching a lecture. You're learning from somebody else's plan. But then there's on-policy learning. That's active. That's learning by doing. You try your own thing, you get immediate feedback from the world, and you figure it out. And that kind of knowledge, it's tough, and it sticks around. And that is exactly what was happening with those kids in the village. They weren't just following some lesson plan from a book. No, they were deep in pure on-policy learning. They were clicking around, arguing, making mistakes, teaching each other. They were building their own understanding from the ground up. And that's why the knowledge stuck. It wasn't just memorized, it was constructed. So we've got this super powerful way of learning, this self-directed, on-policy stuff. But then Mitra stumbled onto something else, a really simple trick that could just kick the whole process into overdrive. Remember that 30% test score? I mean, going from 0 to 30 is incredible all on its own. But Mitra thought,
Can we do better? So he added just one new element. And look at this chart. The score shot up to 50%. And get this, that's on par with students from elite private schools who have expert biology teachers. So what was the secret ingredient? He called it the method of the grandmother. He brought in a young woman who knew absolutely nothing about biotechnology. Her only job was to encourage them. Seriously, she didn't give them answers. She just stood behind them and said things like, "Wow, what is that?" Or "That's amazing, can you show me that again?" She wasn't an instructor, she was a coach, a cheerleader. And this is where it gets really cool, because this lines up perfectly with a new role for educators. In advanced AI, you have these teacher-student models. The teacher AI's job isn't to know the right answer. Its job is to reward the student AI for its process, for its improvement. The grandmother, she was the human version of that. She was nurturing the process of discovery itself. Okay, so what does all of this actually mean for the future of education? Well, it points to a totally new way of thinking about what a classroom could even be. You see, Mitra realized he wasn't just watching a teaching method. He was seeing a self-organizing system come to life. Think about it like a flock of birds or an ant colony. There's no single bird or ant in charge, right? But somehow they create these incredibly complex patterns. That's called emergence. It's where intelligent order just kind of appears from simple interactions. And Mitra's big idea is that learning isn't something that's pushed down from the top, it's something that emerges from the bottom up. And this led him to design what he calls self-organized learning environments, or SOLs. And the recipe is actually pretty simple. You put kids in groups, you give them a single powerful computer, you throw big, interesting questions at them, and you give them access to encouragement, what he calls the granny cloud, which can be people beaming in from anywhere in the world just to cheer them on. This just completely flips the old model of education on its head. The teacher's job is no longer to be this fountain of knowledge, carefully pouring facts into kids' heads. Instead, the teacher becomes an architect of curiosity, a facilitator who poses the big, juicy questions, and then gets out of the way and lets learning happen. And that really leaves us with one last, big, challenging question. If learning really is this emergent property, this thing that just happens on its own, then maybe the most important job of an educator isn't to have all the answers. Maybe their most important job is simply to ask that one question. The one question that is so fascinating, so compelling, that learning becomes absolutely, totally unstoppable.